we are. This is a new segment that Jonah and I decided we wanted to do for the channel called Deep Dive. And what we're going to do is, first off, let me just say, Jonah, welcome. How you doing today, man? Oh, shoot.
Mute.
Oh yeah. Okay. Cool.
I'm
yeah.
good.
Sorry. Yeah.
There we
all right.
go.
There, we're
How
all
are
right.
you, Carter?
I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm good. I'm good. Did you have a nice weekend?
I did. Yeah, it was chill. I didn't do too much. But that's always the best. So,
Yeah. That's always, it's always nice to have it mellow.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. The other day.
Especially when things are so crazy in the week. I
Oh.
have pretty busy weeks. Yeah.
Yeah. I
so
feel
it's always
that.
nice to get that nice couple of days to just do nothing. Or
It really is
close
like
to nothing.
just
Yeah.
like, yeah. Any kind of like just space that we can take to calm our heads down. I've been like, we watched Bloodsport the other night, which was like just totally just thrown back, and I remembered how much I love like old like 70s, 80s, 90s martial arts
Yeah.
movies. They're just like they're it's so top, but
Oh yeah. I love most 80s movies. They have just a certain charm to them. They're great. I grew
yeah.
up on those movies. Watched them like Goonies on VHS or something like that.
Yep. Yeah.
It's nostalgic.
Yeah, exactly.
It's great. It's great.
So yeah, we're basically doing this new segment that we're calling Deep Dive, and the first foray that we wanted to we had discussed this. It was something that had come up in the interview that got cut off, and it seems like it was worth revisiting this stuff. But we've been able to go a little bit further on it, and so basically this one is about sort of looking at cancel culture versus accountability. And what does it all mean? What is, why do people feel a need to cancel other people? Where does that come from? So we're going to like pull it down from sort of a top level to right here in the town. And so right off the bat, I'll let Jonah, I'll let you take the lead on this. We're going to talk about the Harper's letter, which I think if anybody who pays attention to mainstream media right now, you at least have to have heard of this.
Yeah. This was should I read it off or just like kind of explain a little bit?
Why don't you just, sort of explain a little bit of like what their whole thing is about? Like, what's the takeaway from this? Like, what's the message that they're giving us here?
Yeah. So like, there's a number of writers: J.K. Rowling, Malcolm Gladwell, David Brooks, etc. All these like kind of elite, very prominent writers that came together and wrote this letter, which is basically, in my opinion, a reactionary kind of response to cancel culture, and it's them fearing a loss of their platform, but in a very contradictory and sort of condescending way to the people that have never had a platform. I'm sure you could articulate it a little bit better than I could, but what I had written down was it's a reactionary response to the growing threat of accountability for the actions of those in power by those in power. It's a completely contradictory, as pointed out in the rebuttal, which I'm sure we'll go over.
Yeah.
It's completely contradictory. They are screaming about a loss of a platform while writing from a prestigious platform. They are saying that cancel culture is threatening their way of life while they have while they're experiencing no real change to their way of life other than some Twitter criticism. And we've seen this from cancel culture. It's the people in the elite being scared of finally being called out by the people who haven't had a platform because of the way media has operated over the past 4 decades and even longer, going back to old newspapers and stuff. I mean, these people have never had a platform, and now with social media, it's leveled the playing field. And this Harper letter is a response to that leveling of the playing field. And it's a response full of fear from the elite. It's sort of Yeah, I don't know. What's your take
Yeah,
on it?
no, so I think that's a
Yeah.
really good characterization of it. I mean, what I'd add is that like it's how the best way to put this. It's a lack of being able to grapple with criticism ultimately, which is funny because like here's these people who like literally just take heat all day, um, and they're all of a sudden worried about this backlash, and I think the reason is because a lot of these people, and I think generally in American culture, we're not like really all that well prepared to deal with criticism. And I think the thing that I find about cancel culture is, and I think this exhibits it very, very keenly, is just how easily that's going to be another thing that a center neoliberal can take and appropriate and twist and use right back again against the left. And I think, and actually the right has a problem with this stuff too, oddly enough, because there's some of the first people that perpetuated it, and that's something that we'll get to Matt Taibbi's point. But I think the thing to me that really sticks out is just how void of consideration for the power dynamic this particular letter is,
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's like the end of polite society almost. Like we lived in America. There was it was very class based, and we've always been very class based, and that's not the case. Like how much money you have doesn't really matter on Twitter, as other than like you might get a little bit more followers because you have such a large platform already, but that's it. And then other than that, there's the equalizer. So it's like the breakdown of polite society, and the people in power who have thrived off of polite society and remained in their position of power as a result of that are obviously very fearful of what could come as a result of that.
Yeah, well, and it's like, it's trying to use like politeness and respect and kindness and all this stuff as like it's weird to see it used like a bludgeon in this way.
Right.
Because it's like the exact opposite of what the goal of any of those things is.
Right.
So I mean, and I think, that sort of like we'll move on to the rebuttal letter, because I think that's like the more specific letter on justice and open debate, which I think is, this is an incredibly comprehensive response. The Harper's letter, as we just saw, we got that to fit on the whole screen just now, and very, very short. And this piece in the Objective, which is a Substack, and usually this is much more directly supported. So big difference there. Like even in the power structure of media itself, right? Like you're talking about Harper's, which has a record of being really unfair to their employees, and conflicts with their editorial board, and literal direct support for individual journalistic outlets, which often allows you to read before you've even paid. So,
Right.
contextualize the content itself. But this is a really interesting article, and I'm kind of like flying over it really quick.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
Yeah, it's really, really, it's detailed, but what it does is it, frequently in the Harper's letter, there's very vague
anecdotes.
Right.
There's like vague anecdotes that are trying to prove a point that doesn't exist almost, and the rebuttal breaks that down completely. All of them are like, this
right.
is that. Here's how it's wrong.
Right. So it's going through and it's taking each individual point that's made and kind of saying, okay, this is vague. Let's talk about the specific instances of what you're talking about. Okay, when you drill into the details, there's really only one or two instances, and they're kind of one-off as related to something else. Somebody who gets called out in here pretty repeatedly is Barry Weiss for doing this kind of stuff, which, she's known to do that. And, and there's, it's like, and that speaks to, there was another article that I had seen recently that was talking about like an Alan Dershowitz response to somebody calling for, I think it was a two-state solution in Israel and Palestine. Dershowitz is basically calling the guy an anti-Semite. The guy's a Jew. And like, and point aside, Dershowitz is disgusting regardless.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, purely person. Related on to his, connections to Epstein. But
yep.
Putting that aside, this is like, the instances of this are very, very intricate. And the thing to note is just how it's a dynamic of power itself, that this problem exists in a whole bunch of different like smaller bubbles that like we might not be privy to all the time.
Right.
And I mean, I guess that's probably a huge part of what we're doing here today, is to try and like draw a line between this sort of larger conversation. Why sort of I think we'd both say it's worth reading the discourse on this particular topic, because it's like it's a more national conversation that we can actually use to try and understand navigating our conversations that we have locally.
Right.
And so, and I think that there's this Matt Taibbi piece right here where he talks about how it's intense.
Yeah.
But I think, it's not necessarily like, look, I don't always agree with Matt Taibbi. I'll be totally blunt about it. But I think he is good at bringing up points that you probably aren't going to get anywhere else. And in this, Matt kind of pull up what I had on that. He's basically explaining how the same attack strategies are used by the right, which are usually identitarian in nature and formally exhibited by blatant hyperbole, are now being used by the left, but to a much more it's much more affirmed by institution, and it utilizes a more ironic or implied technique, and it also fundamentally appropriates a conversation meant to, as we were talking about before, reallocate power to the people and change it into, oh, well, we're the victims, and sort of turning it on its head. And all of a sudden making, the characterization would be the Twitter mob, of all of these people coming out. And so, that begs the question, how democratic are the Democrats?
That's a pretty deep question that has many layers to it. I mean, it's not even just like cancel culture with that question. It's the structure of the party itself, culturally and politically. It's both. Like, they have set themselves up in a way that feeds the system of elitism and privilege, and keeping people like the working class people from having a platform and speaking out and speaking their truth and getting those experiences on the table. So as a consequence, policy that would help those people gets done. And yeah,
yeah, I mean, like, I think this excerpt right here where he's I thought this part was really like kind of gets it hard, and Taibbi is quoting Professor Danigal Young here, but he says, Stephen Colbert, for example, may say that he's looking forward to the sunny weather that global warming might bring, and the audience members don't. The audience members know this isn't what he really means, but they have to wonder, is he making fun of the kind of conservative who would say something so egregious, or is he making fun of arrogant liberals who think that conservatives hold such extreme views? As Young noticed, this kind of ambiguity that liberals tend to find more satisfying and culturally this is a kind of ambiguity that liberals tend to find more satisfying and culturally familiar than conservatives do. In contrast, conservative talk radio humor tends to rely less on irony than straightforward indignation and hyperbole. So that's where I kind of like got that point from. But is like, you know, the classic example is like the Rush Limbaugh just get him pissed thing, and
Right.
But I think that point about, like, you know, if you look at, you know, Jon Stewart Daily Show and Stephen Colbert with the Colbert Report before he, you know, got into late night talk show hosting and stuff, it's like, I think that's a really good point that, like, that's not something that liberal elites ever really tried to grapple with at all. You know what I mean? Like, oh, why do we think, you know, this, like, never ask themselves, oh, is there any harm in approaching, like, trying to do this way? Like, I'm not against comedy, but dude, like, have some self-reflection, you know?
Yeah. Right. And that's one of the big problems with like the late night talk. I won't name any specific ones, but like late night talk show now, it's all anti-Trump, it's all anti-Republican, and it is based on that like old liberal idea that Republicans are somehow stupid or idiotic, and liberalism is the smarter ideology, and it's a very like ego boosting kind of way to think about yourself, and then you never want to hear any criticism of yourself whatsoever. And in 2016, you saw this with anyone who tried to criticize Hillary. They'd be like, or even just joke about Hillary, that you would have a monster, like a just storm of Twitter people coming after you.
Right.
And even in the 2020 primary, you have the K Hive and all of these other people.
Yeah.
That's just what happens. I mean, it's just very, very strange thing that liberals have done, where you can't criticize or make fun of a liberal. And
Yeah.
Jon Stewart pointed this out when he ended his show, and others who have gone on to not be in late night talk shows anymore because it's a terrible business nowadays. It's just, and it's not even the fault of any one of these. It's kind of like it's not purposeful. Like these people are just doing this as a consequence of the culture that's been created from leaders and neoliberal policies, which gets to the core of why cancel culture exists. And it's because of a stagnation in the how government operates over the past 40 years with neoconservative and neoliberal leadership, and that has,
and how freedom of speech works too, you know, like
exactly.
It's being able to comment. It's like you know, like there's so much about neoliberalism and conservatism that was like, we got this, don't worry, you guys just go to work, do your thing, it'll be fine. And like, and so, and there was, you know, like, and so much rhetoric and so much appeal to like just all the wrong parts of our of people, you know what I mean? Like, it was like it appealed to so much of the selfishness that humans are trying to deal with on a daily basis. And it's like, we lost touch. Like, we lost touch with that space of criticism, you know, like how many people just never bothered to write a letter to the editor, you know, like they got pissed about something.
Yeah, exactly. There was a time in this country where people encouraged criticism. Like there were people like in leadership were like, yes, hold me accountable. I mean, there was obviously problems with that system, and it's not perfect in any way, but like it wasn't what the neoliberals and the neocons have created. And we've totally lost sense with not only that, but the sense of community, especially in local like municipalities and towns and stuff. Like everyone is disconnected. Everyone is fighting for themselves, pulling themselves up by their bootstraps, and no one wants to have a conversation with each other and fix the issues that we've faced over the last 40 years. And it's a masterful strategy.
Yeah, it really is.
It really is. You gotta give props to them for creating such a long-term masterful strategy, but uh, we got to find some way to break it. And while cancel culture has like good aspects to it, and it's like, yes, we need to be holding these people accountable, we got to find some way to perfect cancel culture, or like
Yeah.
hone it in on the things
Yes.
that we really need. We have to hone in this energy instead of just kind of throwing it around. And if someone says some bad thing, just send the masses against them. No, let's send the masses against the people who are creating this culture that results in the people that need to be held accountable. And that's like the moment we have now is just an argument
No, I think that's
100% for it on every level.
I
Yeah.
think you nailed it. And I mean, and that, I guess that sort of gets to the next point. It's like, okay, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about like what is like the right kind of criticism look like? Like how do we, like the next step is like, all right, we've established that cancel culture in a sense serves a serious benefit to our society because it's like the first time in however long that um that the people have like been able to so quickly respond to the people that are in charge of them. Like we've never had this kind of contact at this kind of volume. So the question then becomes like, okay, well, I guess it's a few questions. Like, how do we approach wielding that power so that we don't get drunk and stupid off of it the same way, you know, like Tea Party Republicans did? And then how do we also face the fact that like those spaces, right? Like whether you're Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, like any Snapchat, whatever, right? They're all corporate mediated. So what, like, and I don't know that we necessarily have the answer for that in today's breakdown. You
Right.
know, I think that's a totally different deep dive. But it's like it's worth bringing up because I think it alludes to the interconnectedness of all of the issues that we deal with. You know, like we're sitting here talking about cancel culture, but how many times did class struggle come up? You know what I mean? Like that's
Right.
just kind of it can be difficult to take these things apart. And it's like if we're sitting around trying to talk to conservatives or swing like a moderate or whatever, maybe we don't like go flying off the handle with all this, but at the very least it's worth it for us to take the time and study it, you know? So
100%. And yeah, you can't like just rush people with these ideas if you try to talk to a moderate or conservative. Like they get overwhelmed by that. Like there's so
mm-hmm.
many uh, different layers to this issue that it's because of the intersectionality of all of these issues that it's you have to find some way to present it in like a simple way while also encouraging like research into the complexities of it at the same time. Like present it simple, encourage research into the more complex aspects of it on your own. And that's how we would solve like this issue. And people would then, if they were more educated, if they had more context on these issues and it wasn't just soundbite, 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 maybe we could have a conversation that doesn't result in like canceling of people. It encourages or normalizes the growth of people that were ignorant and didn't at one point like just yeah, I kind of lost
Well,
my train of thought,
no,
but
but
yeah.
it's okay. But I mean, I think that the whole point is like you gotta when you're doing that criticism, right? Like if you've got that soundbite, we certainly have sound bites for this episode today. But the whole point is that like you know at least what we're gonna try and do is go a little further with like actually talking about what happened in the sound bites rather than just like okay we're gonna you know like like we're gonna criticize these people and it's gonna be fun. We're gonna dunk on them like
Right.
you know it's not about
Just
that. It's about like
yeah.
it's about saying hey like what we're doing is we're providing a genuine alternate take. There's no malice baked into that. It's just what you do because, you know, and I think the whole point is to educate yourself on the issue before you try and go and cancel somebody about it or you go and try and call someone out or hold them accountable, which is really like and and maybe it takes like don't think about it in terms of I'm going to cancel this person or I'm going to call this person out. Think about it in terms of I'm going to hold this person accountable because that can change our mindset, right? Like it's literally I think like linguistically speaking, accountability just sounds more formal than calling out. And
Right.
I think like that it's worth considering that linguistic context because it changes the way we think about approaching that criticism, you know, like and to think about it in terms of accountability and criticism and critique, not in terms of calling out, dunking on, slamming. Like there's all this like buzzword stuff, and it really has to fundamentally start with critique. So with that in mind, let's look at a state issue, right? Like, so right
Yes.
here, this is exciting. So, well, exciting, I guess. Yeah, man. This is silly, is what this is. So this here, this here article, which is, it's always funny to reference this particular publication for me because it's just it's conservative as heck. Like it just, you know, but and you know, like I never want to be platforming this stuff, but if you look up cancel culture in New Hampshire, this is what's going to pop up pretty quickly. And you know, and what I would say is that if you're if you're one of the more liberal leaning people that watches this channel, and I know they're out there, right? Like I know that that's a real thing, and you haven't heard of cancel culture yet, please understand that this is getting covered in New Hampshire Journal, and the conservatives are paying attention to it really hard.
That's one of the bigger points that we have to make is like the left is not paying attention to this at all, and that's as like generally, and that is a huge problem because if we don't, then the right will take the narrative on this, and they will succeed in this battle. And what they call the battle of ideas. I hate that term. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Marketplace of ideas. The marketplace of ideas are a battle for, you know,
so, my brain is overloading from all these high level ideas.
Oh God. Oh, I'm an intellectual, Dave Rubin, you know. But
well, Larry King, yeah, wait, hold on.
Wait, oh God, that was horrible. Larry King just takes a phone call from his son.
Yeah.
Oh, the ultimate disrespect. But
yeah, I mean, he just got shut down by Fox. Dave's having a hard time these days. Like,
yeah, when Judge Janine shuts you down after like 5 minutes of you talking, I think you got a problem. You know,
it's so good.
But the left, especially here in New Hampshire, in a swing state, nonetheless, in a purple state, has to use its the media that it has to promote its own take on such an important cultural moment, because the right is the only one doing it right now.
Right.
And if you're a 15-year-old on YouTube or TikTok or whatever, Instagram, what you're seeing is right-wing media pages and meme pages, because they know how to do it best. And then you get indoctrinated into the right-wing belief because it's so simple, it's so straightforward, and they present, especially, I mean, it's a huge problem on TikTok. You see like very simple, straightforward information, and 15-year-olds or 12-year-olds are using the common sense kind of like mindset instead of critical thinking and, you know, context and stuff like that. And through that common sense kind of simple mindset, they get dragged into these ideas. And through the left not
competing in that sphere, like we're not
exactly,
we're just not present
in that sphere. If we're not present, if we're not competing in that sphere, then we lose, and we lose a generation that has is very malleable and is on the internet and is not going to be leaving the internet anytime soon. And the right recognizes this, and that's very dangerous moving forward in the next 7 years, because once these people are adults, they're voting. They've been indoctrinated into the right wing by listening to whoever, Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin, doesn't matter.
Exactly.
And now we've lost them. And then you have a 50-year-old who's stuck in his mindset, who's not going to change his ways, and we're never going to get them. And that's, if we change it now, then we can, you know, solve that issue.
And it's and it, you know, it's like, and I think like the left is in a really good position the same way the far right is in a good position to actually mobilize voters. I know that didn't happen much with Bernie Sanders, and again, that's probably yet another longer segment that we'll have to do.
That'd be a good deep dive. I would love to do that one.
Yeah. So I think that's definitely like a topic worth wading into. But it's, yeah, again, I think the real point is like we got to be able to compete in it. And like, especially on a New Hampshire level, we have publications like New Hampshire Journal. You've got Granite Grok. You know what I mean? Like that's the fucking Breitbart of New Hampshire. Like, and if the left isn't competing in that space, then like there's simply no way it's going to win. Like that's just not going to happen. And I mean, like, I'm perfectly clear about it. Like I do not want us to win, and I do not want us to lose, rather. Like we have to win this. We have to win this. It's not even like, because it's about survival.
At this point, it's fascism. It's at this point the other side is a fascist state that will take us into a corporatocracy, and that's not what anyone needs. So it's a very consequential moment, and we have to take like it's very important for us to win. I totally agree. Yeah.
Precisely. And so like to get into this article right here is talking about how one of the signers of the piece that we just showed a minute ago on the Objective Substack, one of the signers of that is Shonda Prescott Weinstein, who's actually an astrophysics teacher at UNH. Now, this article, which is getting pumped out to conservative readers across New Hampshire, right? It spends a bunch of time talking about how Prescott really is politically active and has talked about concerns of colonialism on Mars, right? Like in the, which is like, okay, I think it's
a valid point.
You
had a billionaire,
right?
You got a billionaire shooting for Mars. I guess that's
right.
Cool. Yeah, I get it.
And I think it's like I'm not even against it. Like, let's have that conversation. If we're making a Space Force, which. Come on, man. Like, it's true. Then we got to have these conversations, right? It's important. So, quote repeatedly, Professor Prescott Weinstein, they don't actually reach out to her. The author of this, Michael Graham, does not reach out to her to interview her, but instead decides to reach out to Sean Jasper from the board of trustees for UNH. Now, just quickly point out, Sean Jasper, member of the Republican Party, serves as Commissioner of Agriculture, former Speaker of the House of Reps. So
totally unbiased.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Makes perfect sense. And there's no and nowhere in this article is it really like, he's just referred to as University of New Hampshire Board of Trustees member Sean Jasper. No additional point about his political leanings. You're not going to mention the bias at all. And that's a way to sneak into people who like maybe don't pay attention to politics, right? Who see their friend on Facebook share this article and they think, oh, Sean Jasper, he's on the board of trustees. He must be, good. Well, makes sense, right? That's good. Yeah.
Reliable, trustworthy source. Yeah.
No. So bunk there, right? Done. And then the other person that he reaches out to, signer of the original Harper's letter, is Steven Pinker. And yeah, now like rather than either one of us like having to say a word about this, okay? And I will always recommend everybody, like I think we both will, to go check out Michael Brooks. He's got a whole bunch of stuff where he's debunked like all this nonsense, right? But a while back, Michael clipped this. Let's see here. So he clipped this. It's on his channel. The video is called "Steven Pinker Caught Being a Stinker on Poverty Stats." But right here is an excerpt of that, and of specifically an interview that he had with Mehdi Hasan. And I'm going to sort of skip past the part that Michael talks about, just because, I think everybody can go watch his setup and that's important. But he points out that Mehdi does a great job of holding him to account. I don't always agree with Mehdi Hasan either, but this is an incredible piece of interview. And we'll just sort of like if anybody wants to know what kind of guy Steven Pinker is, this is the kind of guy that Steven Pinker is.
Ignoring data that doesn't fit your thesis.
Absolutely false. No.
Well,
Which data?
Okay, well, let's talk about it. Let's take global poverty.
Yeah.
You have a chapter in the book on prosperity. You want to make the case that the world is more prosperous and less poor than ever before, and you point to data showing the number of people living on the extreme poverty line, as defined by the World Bank today at $1.90 a day, is down from 2 billion in 1990 to 700 million in 2015. The world is becoming middle class, you say. But surely you know, I know you know, because you're a very clever, well-qualified guy, that there are numerous studies and a number of scholars who dispute that poverty measure as arbitrary, as inaccurate, that in reality, to quote from a recent academic paper by an anthropologist at the LSE, quote, around 4 billion people remain in poverty today, around 2 billion remain hungry, more than ever before in history.
That completely irrelevant to which way the numbers have gone. Of course, the definition of extreme poverty is going to be arbitrary. If you make it higher, then more people will be in poverty. If you make it lower, fewer people.
Exactly.
But no matter what cutoff you set, the direction is downward.
That's not true. That's
yes,
not,
it is.
If you look at the work done by Jason Hickel at the LSE, if you take a poverty line of $5, 1 billion people have been added to the number of people on that poverty measure since 1981. The trend shows the exact opposite when you move it to $5 a day.
In terms of the proportion of people in poverty by that criterion?
No, the sheer number of people.
Yes,
1 billion people have been added to the poverty total since 1981.
Yes, but billions of people have been added to the world as a whole. What's relevant is the proportion.
But you also use absolute numbers in your book. You say it's gone down from 2 billion to 700 million.
Well, I note that by at least the most widely accepted definition of extreme poverty, it's interesting that the absolute numbers have declined as well. But the main point is the proportion, because more people have been added, so anything is going to increase.
You say widely accepted, but this is my point. You don't acknowledge in the book, there's no caveats where you say, for example, Professor Lant Pritchett, Harvard colleague of yours, a development economist who studies this stuff, says the poverty line shouldn't be $1.90, it should be $12, $15 a day. And when you make that simple statistical change, the entire picture of poverty changes, and the arguments in your book basically fall apart, do they?
That's exactly right. And that is exactly the fundamental thing right here. It's not just a number. What's the context you're using?
So, I mean, like, there it is, right? Like, and Michael nails it. It's totally about context, right? Like, if you're going to say, like, and the whole point of this is to say this is how vile Steven Pinker is, right? Like, that for him, he won't go outside of this really egregious measurement, which is, like, completely void of any experience, right? Now, like, it's really important to note that Steven Pinker is an incredibly wealthy man, right? Like, and here's a piece that we had brought up last time, but it got chopped, and I think it's always good to go back to this, because this is in the Scientific American from April 2012, but right here it's I think that this first paragraph really kind of like nails it all on its own. When it says, who is more likely to lie, cheat, and steal, the poor person or the rich one? It's tempting to think that the wealthier you are, the more likely you are to act fairly. After all, if you already have enough for yourself, it's easier to think about what others may need. But research suggests the opposite is true. As people climb the social ladder, their compassionate feelings towards other people decline. So, like, literally, this piece is detailing how the more money you have, the more difficult it is to empathize with somebody who has less money, right? Which leads to total, like, bunk nonsense shit like what Steven Pinker was just talking about, where, like, where it's like, dude, you can't even relate to the concept. Like, if you change it to $5 a day, like, $5 a day? Seriously? Like, yeah. I don't know anywhere in the United States where you can live on $5 a day. I just don't know about it. Like, that's not this country. Maybe globally you could do that. Maybe there are other places in the globe that works, but not here.
And I'm sure and I'm sure even at $5 a day, your basic needs are not being met, and that's right. That's at the core of what conservatives say. I mean, or some trade enthusiasts of NAFTA or something like that, when they talk about these big trade deals that are going to help everybody, And then in the end, it ends up making working people even poorer. And they use statistics like this, axing context from any of the statistics they use, and then they make disingenuous arguments to feed even further extraction of the wealth from the poor.
Yeah, and it's like, and it doesn't even just come down to like, like policy stuff. Like this is just like basic, like,
Right.
basic stuff, like the point here that they make about, luxury car drivers are more likely to cut off other motorists instead of waiting for their turn at the intersection. Like it's a sense of entitlement, right? Like it's this sense of entitlement and like I get to go first, like because of whatever status I have. Like I'm the one that should take the lead. I'm the one that should take the control, and I should act on this. It's like it's not just my right, it's my duty as someone who's reached a certain level, and like these other people don't understand.
I've obviously worked harder than you because
exactly.
You're still poor and you're 40 years old. I'm $40 million richer than you, so I'm obviously at a higher status than you are.
Right.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
And look, that's like, when you're talking about problems, say like you're talking about problems here in like on a local level, right? Like it's weird because we're like what many would, and now we're starting to get like we're shrinking down. But you start talking about it on a local level, right? If you look at the actual economic breakdown of this town, and I may actually be able to pull up that data, because I had there was a point in time where I had it, and I believe I still do from one of the older videos that I had done on like housing data, but the breakdown of like household income in the town is, it's pretty intense. I do have it. I'm gonna need to find out income characteristics. There we go. So let's pull this up. This is the original document that I had sort of gotten my hands on. And basically, I mean, you can see by the chart here that I'll have to try and real-time production, man. It's
yeah, it's tough.
Dude, it's a real thing. It is a real genuine project. So if for anybody who looks at this, let's see here. Our mics are still on, so no worries there. The households by household income, just the sheer number of people that are earning 60 to 75,000 a year and up is pretty serious. And when you start to look at the actual number of households that earn that number, right? The older folks are 65 and over, make up sort of the bulk of that, right? Under 25, it's basically zero. It's, half of the people under 25 that were measured within this survey earn between 45 and 50,000, which is, like, I would imagine that's probably a job at NHBB or something like that. You know what I mean? That's like a local manufacturing job. And then there's another 19 that are in the 20,000 to 25,000 range. And I would imagine those are like your local servers.
Right.
And then, there's more equal of a distribution in the 25 to 44 bracket. But then, it's like the 45 to 65 and then 65 and over brackets are really where you see that wealth concentration, where people start, in triple digit numbers begin to earn greater than 50,000 a year. And that is worth noting because it informs us about how empathetic our voter base in this area will actually be towards policies that will help people who are on lower income scale. If we compare that to the Scientific American study that tells us that there's less empathy, and the greater the distance you have from a lower economic class, the less compassion you're going to be able to feel for them. So it's just like, I know that I'm kind of going off on a side point here, but it's like in order to make that point, I wanted to actually pull up the numbers again and kind of like indicate like, hey, this is a factor,
No, it's totally important. And I don't think people don't really realize that. I think people don't really realize that there's such a wide gap in that, like that those numbers are the real numbers. Like that's the reality of how the town works. And people like to think that some people like to think that everyone's making a good job, that everyone's getting ahead, that their servers are getting paid a good wage, and that everyone's living a fantasy life here in Peterborough. And we forego looking at statistics like this and acting on that. And those statistics, like that helps organizations and stuff around the town form framing around the issues to actually get real change done. Because you can't be like we can't act the same as we would in a city as we can in this town because of that exact statistic. People will not respond to us if we're screaming at them, and which is totally valid in the city. I'm not saying don't do that, but around here, it's not going to work. And we have to totally shift our strategy on getting things done when we act in a town with such a wide income.
Right, exactly. And I think, and the other thing to point out is sort of like, all right, if we want to be more diverse in our town, then we, thinking about, we want to have more young people, we want to have a better diversity of gender, of race, of, acceptance of disability, just in general, literally every single possible different human experience that we can think of that would enrich the community, which people like to hold up as like, oh, we're this artsy community and we, look how nice we are and look how forward thinking we are. And it's like, okay, stats don't bear that out.
That goes back to the point we were making in the beginning. The liberals have to be self-critical and self-analytical, and we have to look at ourselves objectively to really make the change that we all pretend that is here already.
Right. And the point too to that is that it's like, I think there's two sides of it, right? There's like, for the side that is us, is how can we be critical in a way that doesn't cause them to like wall up and shut down and completely destroy the process, which is like what we're, that's the concern with what's happening right now following the last readout session. So, and we'll show a clip of that, and I think you and I will try to do our best to basically provide the critique without all the salt. And unsalted meat here, we're meat and potatoes.
Meat. Smoked meats only.
Yeah. So, but then the other side of it is like to try and think about, all right, meaningfully, how do we create comfortable space for those like liberal leaders that would get defensive when they feel like they're effectively being canceled? The way, like if you've got a liberal town leader that reads The Atlantic pretty consistently, right? like they're probably going to be aware of this, and they're probably going to be colored by the Harper's letter in some way, shape, or form. You know, like I don't know how many people, but Harper's is a big publication, and you know, there's definitely an intelligentsia in town that pays attention to document, like, you know, publications like this. So it's always worth noting that there's probably a certain amount of like, yeah, okay, and then you have to kind of pull a little harder. You're like, no, I need you to think about this other dimension of it before
Right.
folks come off that wall. And it's like, what we're basically about to do right here is we're going to call out, or just try and hold accountability to, the problem with saying, you know, like the problem with getting defensive in a public space, rather than just saying, okay, I'm going to take what was just said, I'm going to consume it into my being, I'm going to like internalize that, and I'm going to learn from it. And talking about it, you know, talking about the struggle is not helpful for anybody. It's really just a waste of time. And what I really need to do is move on to like, what's the policy that we can enact? So
Yeah. And then like because when the organizers in town here have a relationship with the select people and with the town leadership.
mm-hmm.
So when we're trying to create a space, you know, for them to, there's about creating spaces for them to be open, like you said. It's about
Right.
having them like let's have an open dialogue. Let's have you be transparent on what you're doing, what your plans are, your fails, your progresses, because we're a small town and we're going to respect your honesty. And if you're trying to always do the right thing, people are going to recognize that, and people are going to realize, because no one does the right thing all the time, and you have to be transparent about that. And we recognize that, and people would respect that more about a leader. I mean, we'll see the example.
Yeah, we'll get there. So actually, we'll just put this up right now, and I think that there's sort of like these, you know, this is after the most egregious moment in the call has happened, and just to kind of set it up a little bit, and this is sort of like the reaction of people who are sort of holding the conversation. This is their reaction to all of the backlash that they're getting within that phone call, which is like that Zoom call. And I think the thing is, like, to remember, contextually speaking, this is all happening live on Facebook, right? Like, so in a sense,
there's a lot of people, there's a decent amount of people watching,
right?
And the chat was exploding, and
yep,
that the video doesn't portray how tense the situation really was.
Right. And that's why we're bringing this up within the context of cancel culture, right? Because you can see how that environment itself, just seeing those numbers, seeing that immediate response, feels like being canceled, right? Like it feels like it. And whether it is or not, it then has to do with how the person who's on the receiving end of that chooses to act when that call out happens. Much the way all of the people who signed, or the authors of, and people who still defend the positions of the Harper's letter feel. It's that, like, and this is sort of the parallel, right? Is how that, it's that reaction that we have to say, no, remember the power dynamic. Like, always, always, always remember the power dynamic. So here's the clip. We'll just play this, and we'll go from there.
I want to jump in here real quick because, and not to defend us or anything else, but I just want us all to be able to recognize that we're doing something that we've not done before. This is new. This is a new type of forum for us. This is a new type of conversation for us. This is a new type of process for us. So when we do our best, I think I can speak for the entire town staff, not just the administration department, the police department, or the selectmen, but all of the town of Peterborough works incredibly hard to be as responsive as we can to what our residents ask us. We try to answer questions. We try to put forward the information, you know, in a way that, you know, is as clear and as transparent as possible. And we're trying to be as responsive as we can to these, you know, to the request to have these conversations, and to respond as quickly and as completely as possible to the information, you know, to the questions that are put to us. So it's really hard. This is, again, all new, and we're doing the very best that we can. And we are going to stumble from time to time, inadvertently stumble. It's going to happen. But as has been said, We're all human. We're all doing our best. We're all really trying to work our way through this. It's a difficult process, and we're in the air, and as people say, we're building the airplane as we're flying it, trying to make sure that we got the wheels on before we come in for a landing. So it's going to be a little tough, but we're really doing the best we can, and we certainly would not want to drive anyone out of this conversation, particularly the people that helped to start it. That's absolutely not the intent. So
Okay, so like really quick, because this will continue, but I think something that I want to point out here is it's like this, and I don't remember necessarily. I'd have to go back and watch the entire video again, but I'm pretty sure at no point in time was it accused that like any of that they weren't trying as hard as they could, that they weren't like being as clear as they could be the whole time. Like I think that, like all of that was pretty evident, you know what I mean? So it's like, to me it was like my reaction to that, and it's like, look, I like Nicole. I think Nicole is a nice person. I think we have definitely butted heads on some things, and that's okay, but I don't think she's a bad person at all. And I just think that, to me, again, this seems like a reaction of somebody who's holding the conversation, who's basically like, well, we're trying as hard as we can, and it's like, well, yeah, we know, like we know you guys are trying as hard as you can. That's the whole point, right? Like you wouldn't be like, the fact that like our town even has this conversation shows that you guys are trying, and there's like the proof is in the pudding, and I'm always a big advocate for like, if you want to do something, just do it. Like if you want to elevate something, just elevate it. Like don't talk about how you're going to, just do it. Like, and I think that the action purely taken to do this is shows that initiative is present. Now, like my feelings on whether or not this was the appropriate group of individuals to host the first foray into this is like a different matter, right? And we'll get to that too. But I just kind of want to point out that it's like the interesting thing about what just happened right there was I think the best takeaway from the comment was the building the plane as they fly it part, which is true, right? But I think generally speaking, the response that Nicole gives right here is like, it's a defense of an attack that was never made. You know what I mean? Like, it's not about not being prepared, right? It's about not having considered the problem with asking the police chief to basically detail the police's response and then bounce back and say, well, it's all about perception now. It depends on whose body you were in that night, what the truth is. And, and I think, we can all learn from this. And it's like, that's the implication is there. Now that's what I would say in the moment, and we'll get to Karen's response here in a sec, but I think, this is why I would say you gotta be, I keep saying it. I've said it once on a stream today already, but like, you gotta be kind to people and ruthless with power.
Yeah.
And, I think I'm sure that being in the townhouse all the time and spending a lot more time with, the police chief and the internal town government and being inside the bubble that is working at the townhouse, right? I'm sure that to a certain extent, being in that space primes somebody to be, to lean towards defense of it, right? And the whole point is to maintain that critical perspective. And I think that's just, I understand why it was lost, but it's important to say this can't ever be far from one's mind when doing this work. So.
Yeah. Yep.
And we'll play the rest of this because I think what Karen has to say here is sort of the next most important part.
Nicole, I want to say this. I have no experience with this kind of thing. I wanted to be able to bring a conversation together, but I have facilitation experience, but this kind of topic is so, as Nicole said, this, like, we have not done this before. So what I would ask if you have experience doing this, if you would be a better facilitator than if you could lend that to this conversation, if you're a member of this community and you are the person who knows that you could do this better than we're doing it, step up, because we're doing the best we can. I assure you, I'm devastated that I heard Eddie and Emma, that they're friends of mine. So that was like, so I'm going to have to go deal with that, and I will. But I would tell you something, we're doing everything we know how to do, and that everybody has different ideas about what would work better. I want to hear them. And if you think you can do this better, then give me a call and let's talk about it, and I'll create an environment where you can lead it. Because honestly, I want this to work. I want us to have conversations that move us forward. And if I'm not the person to facilitate it, I'm happy to step aside, but I need to know who else can do it. Because right now, this is the best we've got. So, so help me, help us, right? Some of you are really skilled at this, and if this is not my thing and it's your thing, then let me know.
So yeah, I mean, like, look, I don't want to like slam on Karen too hard here, because clearly she's like upset and she's trying, you know. I think the thing is, like, why rush into it?
Right.
You know?
Right. I mean, it's totally reactionary. That's what it is. I mean, it's not to criticize anyone personally, but like the response of the entire town government was reactionary to the moment that the entire country was in, and they felt they had to respond. And instead of doing a deep dive into and you know, self-analyzing themselves, the town government, how it works, and moving forward from that, hearing Eddie and Emma's story, their story, and in the listening session, and moving forward from that, and coming up with a clear, tangible, thought out plan, seems that they kind of just were like, okay, we need to have a conversation on this, let's do it right now. And then it dissolved itself into the chaos that we now find ourselves in. And that's sort of what always happens when you have a reactionary response instead of a thoughtful one.
Right.
And you know, if we had that's a hard one to watch again. It's
tough. It's definitely a tough watch, because it's like, you know, I think, you know, like I go back to it and I just think about, like, you know, like, this is like, I don't think that there's necessarily a way that the people who were attending could have handled dealing with that better, because there's a lot of outrage, you know what I mean? Like, and I wouldn't say that, you know, like, I don't think it necessarily should have gone down any differently than what it did. And what I maintain is that this stuff needs to keep happening, right? Like, these forums need to continue happening. And, you know,
I mean, that was our fear after this happening, was it's not going to happen again because it just dissolved, and then that doesn't look good for them, and then it won't happen again. Like, no, that was what we needed to see.
Right.
That's exactly what we needed to see to move forward in this moment. And we have to see the ugly and the good of everything, and because it's not all peaches and roses. It's like there's
right.
a whole lot of layers to this,
and you know, like, and I think this is to me, it's interesting, because this is a strange initiative to want to take on for, like, the procedural government of the town. Like, why this wasn't immediately delegated out into, like, okay, next select board meeting we're going to propose hiring a mediator from outside the community to come in and, you know, conduct this conversation. Like, what was it that felt like it needed to be knee-jerked in a way that the people in charge of things were handling the situation? And, like, you know, at the beginning of this video, Karen comes out speaking about how she's coming from the economic development side of things, you know, not even necessarily as a select person. So there's a question there of like, all right, what's the which hat are you trying to wear right now? And I think the argument would be none of those hats can be taken off at any time, right? Like that, like all of those hats are simultaneously being worn when you're in this public space and you're the one who's conducting the conversation. You're the one with admin power over the Zoom chat, and I'm like, you can share your screen, whereas like everybody else in the community can't, like stuff like, and maybe that's not necessarily true, but the point being is like there's authority within there, and the question to me becomes like, is this the right part of the town government to be handling this, and what role does each individual player play in dealing with racial justice and police accountability in this town, which are, and I think, I've spoken on this times before where like, I think while they're interrelated issues, they are issues that will likely need to have very distinct conversations because they entail a number of, connected issues that are going to make it way too big and messy of a conversation to actually get something meaningful done. Like if you're talking about
you
healing,
gotta zero in.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead.
Right. No, it's just, you gotta zero in with these issues because, like you said at the meeting yesterday, or Tuesday, it was it's like fixing the policing issue will not fix racism in this town. Or I think Anna might have said that. There's an underlying culture of racism in this town and in other towns in this country that if we don't fix and if we don't address, nothing else will change as a result of that, because that's the problem with all these other problems is we have underlying cultures of racism, homophobia, all of these other things that are preventing us from having the actual conversation that we need to have to move forward. And
right.
You're right. We need to have those zeroed in, distinct conversations to keep it from going all over the place, and then nothing will get done. And it was just a theorized conversation on what we'd all like to see.
Yeah, totally, exactly. And I mean, and I think like, so to that end, it's about like, all right, like, play the role that you're here to play, kind of thing. It's. I'm trying to find the best place to sort of take this from. Like first and foremost, let's deal with like the cancel side of things, right? Like, because that's really what the main video is about today, right? So like, there's what I would say is that, like in this video, what everybody's doing up until this point is trying to hold accountability for an oversight, right? And they're frustrated, sure, but it's an act of holding accountability. And the response that kind of comes up is like, well, if you can do this better, just, call me. You know what I mean? Like, and this is something that I've definitely heard before. If you think you can do better, why don't you run for office thing, is like, I'm not necessarily saying that I know better, right? I'm not necessarily saying I'm trying to run for office, but you did.
And you're in office.
And you're there. And
we elected you. Yeah.
Right.
It's
right.
condescending for you to say, well, why don't you run for office when you were the one who stood up and said you will help us with these issues?
Right.
It's a condescending abdication of power that, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And it's, and I think, it's important to not let the people on the other side of things use that kind of, that feeling canceled reaction to circle the wagons and close off the conversation into private only interactions, right? If there's a plan that's going to be shared to deal with this, right? If that meeting didn't go well and there's going to be other meetings that are going to come up or something like that, that's got to be
public. Yeah.
Right. Why and something that I know has happened, because I mean we both seen it, that private emails were sent out following this, detailing a list of actions that the town was going to, or at least planning to, or trying to take to act on what was taken from this particular readout session. And yeah, and the question is, why is it good enough to send this out in a private email to a handful of people that showed up to that meeting, as opposed to just making a press release, putting it in the ledger transcript, posting it on the town website? Why,
And doing that initially, because it took that person who received the email going back and asking them to put it out publicly for her to even say that they're going to put it in the newspaper. That's a problem. And you have to, why wouldn't you put that out as a press release to begin with? You sent it out to a number of people. It's like you said, it's obviously good enough for those number of people, then it's good enough for the public. It's a plan that you've outlined in a time where we are asking for a plan. And for you not to think about initially releasing that to the public is a, it's a big problem. I mean, these things have to be public. We have, especially in such a small town, we have to be transparent with the process, and that includes planning and stuff like this.
right.
What was outlined in the email.
And if it's not there yet, if it's not completed, then don't send it to anybody.
Yeah.
You just keep it in house until you've got a 100. Like, that's okay. That's not something I don't think any of us will fault anyone for.
We'll be happy that you're working on it and trying to perfect a plan instead of just throwing one out there because you think you need one.
Yeah, and it's just, it's like the thing is, a response like this is going to be void of the necessary policy changes required to create like a new baseline by which the community can actually be like healthy, housed, fed, like feel accepted, right? Like, it's going to be a lot easier to have these kinds of conversations and to facilitate this type of thing if that base policy stuff is done. And that's really where that's what the select board can super duper affect. I think about there's other wings of the government that are better prepared to deal with this problem, right? Like the library, Parks and Rec. If it's the library, they can help. They can host more sessions. They can do, like reading sessions, communication sessions,
historical context.
Right. There's so much. And then on the park side of it, it's like, especially with COVID going on, those are public spaces. You know what I mean? Those are spaces for forum, right? So it's about use the institutions that create the public commons, right? Like that old school notion of public commons, and utilize that. But remember, it's the townhouse government who should be concerned more so with a rigorous audit of their own financial spending and transparency and policy decisions, and decisions that preceded their own tenure. I've been told that there's absolutely public health spending, but you don't see it show up in the $0 health budget. And it's like, and I've been told, well, if you want to know more about that, you can ask. Okay, cool. My question is, why didn't that already happen? Why is there absolutely no literacy? Why does it take until someone gets frustrated to come along and holler about it and cause a fuss and request thousands of documents for that kind of a topic to come up? Why aren't we just finding a better way to educate our citizens about civics? You know what I mean? If they really want to do an education program, right? Maybe it makes more sense for the select board to be coming up with ways to, and especially through EDA, to help do maybe it's instructional videos or information videos about how to get something done in the local government. You know what I mean?
Right.
Where, we need maybe we need a video about how to do a warrant petition article. Maybe we need a video about how to submit a request for review from select board, like how much time do they need? Like, what's the waiting period on trying to do something? Like all that little like nitty gritty stuff. It's like if you go back over, you filter through previous conversations that have happened in the community, what are the things that come up like that? What are bits of information that people just don't seem to know?
Right. I totally agree with that. The select board has a great opportunity to engage the community and mobilize all of us to create a place where everyone is housed, healthy, and safe, like I said. And the fact that the select board kind of not refuses, but hasn't done that already is troubling. That we have a local community with all of these resources. We have the parks, we have a library with an extensive amount of information that we could use to create such a thing, and we're not using it already. We haven't already figured out that through these resources, we can create a much better town for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes back to the lack of compassion in the wealthy community in this town. Is that's the only reason we don't have that. So it's about Ivy said this when you did an interview with her. It's like we got to get people in those town meetings. Like that's the reason that zoning doesn't have, like, our zoning changes that we want don't happen, is because those people aren't in the meetings, and the people that are against that zoning change go, and then nothing happens because of that.
There's no counterweight, right?
Exactly. So we have to get that counterweight in there, and the way we do that is by having the select board civically engage, or not just the select board, but town government and town leaders engage the community on us, like civically engage the community, and then we have more people involved in local politics. And then once more people are involved in local politics, that's when the gears start turning, because the gears aren't turning because we have such a small amount of the population in town talking about the issues that affect the greater population of the town. And that's
right. And I think, and it's important too to get back to that context of like cancel culture versus accountability, right? When we say this is concerning, right? Like, or about something that's happened in the town. That's all it is. It's concerning. It's something that, like, why is it concerning? Well, it's concerning because we don't know why that is, right? Now, I always think something that comes up often is like, there's way more work than there are employees at the town. That's very true. I'm sure that's incredibly true, that the amount of work that each individual employee needs to do in a day is far greater than what can get done. Flip side of that, I always hear about how wealthy Peterborough as a town is. So the question becomes like, all right, what's the disconnect there? Like, why don't we have more employees? Why aren't we, like where's that assistance level? Like, is the volume of work that we have to do much greater than we're able to deal with right now? Does that require more local government spending to make sure that it actually runs efficiently? Is it running efficiently now? When we hear, and when we hear we're very efficient, what does that mean? Is that like we're efficient in comparison to what other space, or what point in time for Peterborough previously? What does efficient mean? How does that concept, is that efficiency scaled to where we were at 10 years ago, or is it scaled to where we could be at in society because it's 2020? And how many documents have been digitized? Like, how accessible are like archives in town? How archaic is something? And certainly there would probably be a lot of return from local town officials that would tell you, well, the problem is up at the state level. You got to take that up to the state level. And it's like, okay, yeah, sure. I don't disagree with that. As we pointed out, you got to call things out on a state level too. You got to call out idiot Republican journalists who are mischaracterizing unbiased reporting and interviews that are actually with neoliberal morons and right-wing boneheads. So, you gotta hold accountability to all aspects of it at every level, right? And I think it's it's of the utmost importance that we come in here and we say, look, Karen, Nicole, you are not canceled. Okay, I'm not canceled at all. We still want to work with you. Like we, you know, we care about you. We do like we voted for you. We, you know, we will come. We will have conversations with you. We like you as people. You know, we don't wish ill upon you in any way, shape, or form. We just don't necessarily agree on everything all the time, which is okay. But don't take the criticism from us as a personal attack. Like, these aren't ad hominems. You know, it's very, very, you know, it is frustrating that it was allowed to happen. You know what I mean? And yes, there's a certain amount of like, there was a line that was crossed when Karen did the whole perception monologue, that it wasn't like, it was not right. You know what I mean? And I know that it wasn't necessarily intentionally not right, but it wasn't. And I've been in that situation myself plenty of times, you know, like where I went off on something and then someone was like, you know what, this point. And I just got that, like, just the pit in my stomach, and I start sweating, and you know, like, it's just like choking. It's like, you know,
no one wants to be wrong, or no one wants to be called out for saying the wrong thing or offending somebody. And when you do it inadvertently, which was a big theme of that report out session, there was a lot of talk of that wasn't my intent by the chief and other people and stuff. And it's not about what your intent was. It's about the effect of your actions. And you have to just be like, okay, I understand what happened, why it happened, you know, and hold you like we've been saying, hold yourself accountable for the actions that you did. And it's just, instead of just kind of, oh, that wasn't my intent, I'm sorry, just be like, okay, I'm sorry, like that
I'm sorry. And and remember too, like that, like we all do that. You know what I mean?
Right,
like that's not a unique, that like yeah, in that moment it's specific to you, but that experience is very, very human. It's not
and we all recognize that whenever everyone was calling them out, it wasn't visceral. It was all like, we know that you're doing a good job, Karen. We're not trying to attack you. I feel like almost everyone prefaced their statement with, we're not trying to attack you personally, or something like that.
Right.
And you know, it was totally the fault of them for thinking that anyone was trying to come after them, or anyone was trying to cancel them, or, you know,
or call them out, or like whatever,
call them out,
wherever that falls into that spectrum, right? Like,
yeah.
And it's just about, you know, like to de-escalate that situation and say, hey, like, criticism can occur amongst allies. You know, like, it is okay for that to happen. We don't, you know, like,
and it's healthy too. It's healthy for the progression of your movement,
right?
Which is the main argument for having someone else come in and mediate this. It's because we need someone who will remind us of that, someone who will de-escalate the situation, help us remind us of that, help us remind of the goal, the ultimate goal of this conversation that we were trying to have, so we can then move past what had just happened, if something does happen, and go back to a productive conversation that gets something done, which could have happened in the report out. And it's just about continuing to hold things like that in town.
And I mean, and I think there's a real value to making sure that, like, that whoever that mediator is that comes in, that they also, you know, not just have a literacy in dealing with this, but also have some sort of at least base understanding of that experience of economic struggle and of societal othering as based off of identity. You know, like I'm changing my thinking a little bit, and I'm like, I'm feeling like I maybe need to be less critical of the term identity politics, but be far more critical of the term politeness politics. Like you alluded to that earlier, and I thought that was really good. It's like, you know, like let's get rid of all this, like, this decorum shit. Like, it's killing me.
Yeah.
You know, like, just
and it's killing us on many different levels. The decorum parliamentary procedure, all of this stuff that was created hundreds of years ago that we still operate off of is not working for the modern era. It's not how societies operate now, and it's stagnating everything on a local, state, federal level, and international level for that matter. International courts face this same problem with decorum, and we, not just in Peterborough, but we everywhere have to move past this polite politics and this decorum politics, and because civility is a tool of the wealthy, civility is a tool of those empowered to keep those at the bottom from getting ahead, because we're in a class war, but a one-sided class war where we are forced to be polite to those in power, but those in power are oppressing and extracting resources and wealth from us. How are
Right.
you supposed to be polite to people that are doing that to you?
Right.
On a national level, of course, but like, you know, it's
then
very,
and then on the local level, it's like, you know, for that, it's like a lot of the people that end up getting alienated in these conversations are younger people, more you know, more diverse people that are, you know, look, these people pay taxes here too. Like if you rent or like have a mortgage, you pay taxes no matter what, right? Like that's so so those people get that say, and the reality is that the base of in this community, as in many communities with like a small business ecosystem, is that it's those people that keep those businesses up and running in terms of like keeping them staffed. You know what I mean? It's, you know, it's younger people that are able to go do the work at Rivermead. So when you've got Rivermead being the retirement side of anybody who's not from the community that's watching this, we have a whole slew of retirement communities in this town. And they actually employ a lot of young people. And they could employ more young people if they did more for, you know, family services, for uplifting the what would be traditionally more working class, low income lifestyles, right? Which will allow for, say, you know, a recent immigrant to the United States to be able to set up shop better because they don't have this crazy high bar of entry. You know, like if we're complaining about Peterborough being 95% white or whatever it is, like why are we not creating more affordable options for people who would be able to immigrate and increase the diversity in our community? Like where's the effort to do something about that? You know what I mean? And like, and it's like, again, it's like in order to do something ethical on the identity front, you got to do something meaningful on the policy front, which is why it's so imperative that the town, like the townhouse, these town officials, rather than being focused on, you know, holding forums like this, actually be focused on audits. And really looking at the numbers and thinking about, all right, how can we pinch every penny to make sure that we're helping folks get those basic needs, get food, get shelter, get health services, all that stuff, right? Like, you know, the town, granted, we only had 15% voter turnout, but like overwhelmingly people voted on the Medicare for All petition to support, to send up to Congress. And it's like, you know, like it's clear what people want. So why don't we just advocate for that? You know what I mean? And why are we spending our time with these conversations that aren't necessarily helping? Like, look, like if, you know, for people that are involved in local government, it's like, hey, if you want to like make a change, fill out the questionnaire and try and get into that local surge chapter that's starting up. You know what I mean? Like,
help mobilize your community if you want to make a change.
Exactly.
Stop talking about it and get into the mobilization piece of it. And this is on every level. I mean, I get frustrated by going to like these meetings and organizations and stuff, and everyone's talking the talk, and then we have an hour and a half of a meeting and no mobilization, no talk on how to mobilize people gets done, no goals get done, and then we're just protesting for the sake of protesting almost, and it's not really doing anything. And the same thing is on the town government too. Town government is placating to public opinion instead of doing the hard work and mobilizing. And somehow we have to just break free of that, cycle and mobilize the community around these issues.
Yeah, well, and I
Because
think
the support is there.
right. No, you're absolutely right. And I think a big part of it is like, you know, a lot of times we want to act before we educate ourselves, which leads us into these situations where we're way over our head, and then all of a sudden we can get canceled for saying something that we didn't mean, right? Like, it's if we take the time to say like, all right, like, to go back to that idea of like, know the role you're playing. You know, what is it that I, with my position, with my power, with my voice, what can I do? Like, what's the best place for me to be focusing my attention right now? Because those groups, those movements, those coalitions, right, they're made up of people that take individual action, and they recognize that there's a real need for that individual drive, and to you recognize who's good at something, and then you lift their voice up on that topic, right? And you back your coalition, your cadres supports that, right? Like it emphasizes that, it builds it up, it empowers it. That's really where the where that meaning is coming from. You know what I mean? Like, and that's how you can kind of get that done. And then for everybody else to learn to hand off the torch to somebody else when you don't know enough about a topic. Like, know to say, I don't know enough. That's like,
Right.
That's a really hard thing to do.
For
a lot of people.
A lot of people can't recognize that. No one has all the answers, and that some people are more versed in other things than other people. And as a result, sometimes when you're talking about certain issues, you need to, like you said, pass the torch and have them talk about that issue because they know more about it. Or if you need to do something and you're not as skilled as this other person, let that person do it, and because they're more skilled at it. And then from that, you can build a more strong foundation that will help you create whatever you're trying to create. And that's true on every organizational level. Like, you can't, like, you as a boss can't do everything. You have to mediate work between other people, and in organizations and town governments, it's the same thing.
Yeah. And like, okay, so I think like, I have shared this text pretty repeatedly, over the past, I guess like week. I've shared it, like I personally have shared it on like Twitter and Facebook, and like I've wanted everybody to pay attention to it. I don't know how successful I'm going to be, but like and there's a certain struggle that I think like leftists need to remember, is that like it can be difficult when you're quoting somebody like I am right here with Che, where like Che Guevara, where it's like, yeah, okay, like we're talking about Cuban Revolution, and like this is
Right.
but like, look, all points aside, I think it's probably worth having a very nuanced conversation about Cuba at a different time, but and there's plenty of content that people can watch and read and learn about that will give you a more nuanced take on Cuba, because it's important. But I think this is from this excerpt is from the Cadres, the backbone of revolution. It's a really short little excerpt. Not a long piece that Che wrote here, but I think there's a couple sections that I just, like we can kind of close this whole thing off with this, because I think this is a good way to approach thinking about how to act in these spaces, so that we can, and it's ways to behave that we can use to remind ourselves to not get lost in the noise of all of this cancel culture stuff, and to remember like what the actual role in democracy really is. So this is sort of, like, I think this speaks to the problem itself, where he says, We all performed our roles as well as we could, but it was not without pain and anxieties. Many errors were committed by the administrative section of the executive. Enormous mistakes were made by the new administrators of enterprises who had overwhelming responsibilities on their hands. And we committed great and costly errors in the political apparatus also, an apparatus which little by little began to fall into the hands of a contented and carefree bureaucracy, totally separated from the masses, which became recognized as a springboard for promotions and bureaucratic posts of major or minor importance. If that doesn't kind of distill the problem, I don't know what does. I think that's a really, really succinct way of just describing the strife and the struggle of being in this position, of having systems of power corrupt people that would otherwise be doing, and I'm not even saying corrupt, but just like set astray people that would be doing the work that, you set out to do something and then it just doesn't end up being that way. And it's a bummer.
Yeah, you can lose touch by being in the position itself. You get
Right.
so wrapped up in every day of the day-to-day of like being a whatever, it doesn't even matter, and then you lose touch with your ultimate mission, which you had when you were running.
Yeah, exactly.
Like governing, people have a total misunderstanding of what governing is, and then that creates like a shock when you get elected and you're like, ooh, and then you can get wrapped up in that and lose touch. It's not a corruptible thing. It's just sort of a natural thing that just happens as a result of the dynamics of that job.
Right. And it's important to understand that a lot of the voicing that comes out of this sort of like the opposition, like the people that have the courage to step up into those spaces and try and hold that accountability, which may or may not be getting misinterpreted as canceling, right? It's important to understand that within that context, like these are the people who are members of your rural youth union or trying to join Surge, or they're part of the People's Coalition, whatever it is, right? If you're on a state level, you're doing something like Rights and Democracy or the New Hampshire Youth Movement or 350, whatever it is, whatever your issue is, right? Those are what Shea would characterize in this as the cadres, right? And I think this is where it gets it gets really interesting for me, is like what a cadre type is. We should say that a cadre person is an individual who again, it's so important to recognize, like, you've got a communist here talking about the cadre person is an individual. Like, that's like one of the first things that comes up. So there's a recognition of like the individual value of members of that cadre who will step up and do that work, right? Who's achieved a sufficient political development to be able to interpret the extensive directives emanating from central power, make them his, and convey them as orientation to the masses. A person who at the same time also perceives the signs manifested by the masses of their own desires and their innermost motivations. I'm gonna switch this up a little bit and try and degender this as much as possible, but they're an individual of ideological and administrative discipline who knows and practices democratic centralism, and who knows how to evaluate the existing contradictions in this method and utilize it fully in its many facets, who knows how to practice the principle of collective discussion. Like, bam. To make decisions on their own, to take responsibility in production, whose loyalty is tested, and whose physical and moral courage has developed along with their ideological development in such a way that they are always willing to confront and conflict, or any conflict, and to give their life, basically give their life to the good of the revolution. They're also an individual capable of self-analysis, which enables them to make the necessary decisions and to exercise creative initiative in such a manner that it won't conflict with the discipline. Like, this is it. This is it right here, is that that discussion of like, to be that good member of that coalition, to really do that meaningful work. that self-analysis is just as important as that willingness to step out and take that charge and to understand the systems of power, that there has to be a balance between the, you know, between the ego and the id, you know?
Yep. Yeah, 100%. That's it. You gotta, it's not even about like getting rid of the ego either. The ego is an important part of having skills and you as an individual contributing to the movement. It's about keeping your ego in check.
Yes.
And not letting it get out of hand, and not letting yourself, you know, try and co-opt the movement for your own personal goals.
Right.
And that's
right. Exactly.
That's the problem that movements have. Not even just left-wing like communist movements. It's movements everywhere. All right-wing movements everywhere. Because humans just have this problem with letting their ego take the drive instead of focusing on the bigger picture for the society as a whole. And
exactly.
That, yeah, Che Guevara hits it perfectly on that. Not that I agree with everything Che Guevara says. Don't cancel me, but
yeah, right,
but, you know,
yeah,
like,
here we are. No, but
like,
but seriously, like, and you know, like, and that's the thing is like people need to stop getting so upset about like whether or not we'll quote a communist. Like, I don't like, I don't care.
I don't care.
I don't.
Yeah,
I don't
quote
care.
Someone that if they have a point that kind of explains the point that I have made, then that's okay. That doesn't mean I vindicate his entire life and support everything he's ever done. And that was one of the huge problems with what happens in the national media is someone will say something like, Cuba has education now because of Castro. And then, oh, you're a communist. Oh, you're going to turn this country into socialist Cuba. Hold on for a second. Hold on.
Yeah.
We got to be able to have nuanced conversations based on information and quotes and people and historical context. And if we can't have that, we're going to lose. It's going to get really bad very fast once we can't, after a few years of just not being able to have an intellectual conversation on anything whatsoever. It's going to degrade to a point where fascism can slip in super easily.
Right.
And I'm sure there's historical context for that. I can't think of anything right now, but.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, but I mean, I think we really kind of like, we went all the way around it though. You know what I mean? Like we went all the way around it and then hit it right on the head, which
Full
is like,
circle.
Yeah. We're like, you know, it's like, and that's the thing is like, even this video itself is like a test of that. Like if anybody watches this and they feel like, oh, well, the entire thing is devoid of value because they quoted a communist at the end, right? Like, That's the whole point. You got to learn how to build coalition with people outside of your view, whether you agree with them 100% of the time or not. And like, if we can't sit here and engage with ideas that we don't like or we don't want to, you know, like we find detestable, like we're past a point where we could just contain those ideas. You know what I mean? Like they're out into the world. They're all over the internet. To your point about like how much right-wing propaganda has seeped through YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and TikTok. And like, I mean, like, dude, I don't even fuck with TikTok yet. Like I haven't like, I seriously, like it's too much for me. Like I'll leave that one to Gen Z. Like y'all can have it. Yeah. But you know, it's just, it blows my mind, I guess, that like, you know, because you know, obviously I took it at the time, you know, I thought it was, you know, like, yeah, this is definitely something that I need to consider. But at the same time, I think it's like, I'll consider it, but it doesn't mean I'm going to necessarily change my rhythm. It just might change how I'm like perceiving like possible outcomes. But it was like, you know, you got to be careful with saying all that stuff about socialism because it's just like the word alienates people. You know, you got to be careful about bringing up Karl Marx because like he's a really polarizing figure. And it's like, look, okay, fair point, right? Like fair point. That just means that I need to be able to like not let myself get triggered and upset and have somebody call me a communist and then overreact to them saying that. It's like, no, like, I just disagree with your premise. Like, here's an idea. I don't care about the rest of the canon of work right now. We're talking about this idea that's directly in front of us. We got to deal with that idea. In the same way, I think, like, you know, if we really want to deal with cancel culture, right? Like, if that's a power we want to wield, maybe some of the people we need to be studying are conservatives.
Yeah, we got to know their point of view if we want to be able to debate it. You got to understand the other side. I mean, like that's one of the, that's one of the things you have to do if you want to make a coherent argument. Is you have to understand what the other side is saying. You have to like sort of get where they're coming from, so you can be like, no, 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 I understand, I understand. You want smaller government, individual liberty. Yeah, totally agree. Let's meet. We have some points of contention where we can meet. And as soon as you don't, as soon as like if someone calls you a communist or something like that and tries to get a reaction out of you or get you triggered, just be like, okay, and then don't get triggered, react in a civil way, and they'll reciprocate that, and then you have a conversation, and then you can get somewhere. And it's just about, if someone tries to trigger you, react civilly, and just don't try not to get emotional about it, and try not to get wrapped up in what they're saying, because that just plays into the thing that they're exactly trying to do to you. Cancel you, shut you down, own the liberals or whatever.
Yeah.
Snowflakes, that sort of thing.
Well, and
Calm
I think
down.
yeah, and I think it's funny. It's just like my feeling is always like, the left has been losing for however long now, but at no point in time did we ever learn how to take a punch. Like
Yeah.
and that's it. Like and, I mean, and I say that from like to like the farthest reaches of the left to the like the most center leaning like people that would just barely consider themselves on the left. Like ain't none of y'all learn how to take a punch yet. And that's like that's it. Like you got to be able to take some hits and not let them knock you down. So that's I think that's it. That's really the bottom line on cancel culture, and
100%, yeah.
and being held accountable is learn to take the hit. So awesome. Well, Jonah, this was a really good first deep dive.
Yeah, that was awesome. I'm excited for more of them.
Yeah, and we'll be talking. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Obviously, follow Jonah on Twitter. He is. We'll get the little name tag up. Proletarianism on Twitter. I'm Larry Folger on Twitter. You can also follow locally sourced NH SRCD on Twitter. On Patreon /locally sourced. Obviously pop down in the lower hand corner there. You can hit subscribe, bell for notifications, so you can get a heads up anytime that we do one of these guys, as well as any other live streams. And yeah, smash that like button too, for good measure. And awesome. So thanks everybody, and we'll catch you soon.
Bye.